Welcome to the Comics Fu Show.
I'm your co-host, Patrick Lugo, and with me is co-host Kurtis Fujita.
As a kid, I loved Kung Fu movies. So I went to Chinatown, trained with a wise teacher, and became a Kung Fu master. Sounds simple, right? Not really. My journey, like the study of Kung Fu, was as arduous as it was rewarding, filled with as many secrets as revelations and as much heartache as triumph. It's a defining moment in my life, and while I began studying Kung Fu to learn how to fight, what I discovered was a way to live. Martial arts never came easy to me. I was far from talented, and even farther from being the chosen one. It was only through years of tenacious perseverance that I was able to make steady progress. And so, I was surprised when my master told me that I should teach Kung Fu and share the art outside of Chinatown. I did just that and taught Kung Fu to my own students for 20 years. I always wanted to do more to share the art of Kung Fu with others, but was limited by only being able to teach those within my immediate area. What about the rest of the world? Then one day, I had one of the deepest insights about Kung Fu. I realized that the punches, kicks, throws, and myriad of martial maneuvers are merely the delivery system for the true essence of Kung Fu, the philosophy and way of life. Having worked for years as a professional artist and storyteller in film, animation, video games, and comic books, I realized that I could draw upon this unique skill set to share my passion for Kung Fu with the greater world. And so I created Shadow Ghost, a Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master. The first issue is created entirely by myself, from story and art to colors and lettering. Every panel is filled with unprecedented accuracy in its depiction of Kung Fu by a comic book creator who knows from first-hand experience what it means to be a Kung Fu master. Shadow Ghost is a martial arts coming-of-age story about a young man whose search for the truth about a legendary hero leads him to study Kung Fu, and through a twist of fate becomes part of the legend himself. For the first time in comic book history, you can immerse yourself further in each issue with Kung Fu skills technology, powered by Tiger Crane Kung Fu. Scan the QR code at the back of the comic and follow an exclusive link to an online instructional video where I teach you Kung Fu techniques featured in this series. With Kung Fu skills technology, you can do more than just read about the Shadow Ghost saga. You can become a part of it. The first issue is completely finished and ready for print. All that's needed is for you to make a pledge of support so that we can fund the printing of the first issue. Together, we can share the wisdom of Kung Fu with the greater world. Shadow Ghost is the story of Kung Fu. It's about the people, the art, the culture, and the philosophy. It's my story and the story of those that I've learned from, taught, fought, and loved. Join me and become part of the vibrant legacy in a place and time where we might not be the chosen one, but where we can make a choice to be part of something bigger and greater than just ourselves. I'm Sifu Kurtis Fujita, and this is Shadow Ghost, the Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master.
Hi, I'm Plugo, author, illustrator, comic creator, and the art director for Kung Fu Magazine for more than 20 years. But I'm here to talk to you about a project that's really special to me. It's the middle grade graphic novel, A Tiger's Tale. Imagine the story of tigers and dragons and martial artists and monsters So when I launched the campaign for A Tiger's Tale Volume 1, I did not know what to expect, but it succeeded thanks to a group of passionate backers. It was also awarded the Make More Comics art grant that year and was later featured as part of an art gallery exhibit. And that's why I'm coming to Kickstarter, to cover production fees, printing, copy editing, things like that. Books completed, with the exception of a few pages I've set aside for color over the course of the campaign. This turned out to be a popular feature of Volume 1's campaign, so I thought I'd bring it back for Volume 2. I think it's going to be great fun for everyone. Hope you'll support the campaign. I'm very excited about it. Thanks for stopping by.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Comics Fu Show.
Welcome, where we stand at the crossroads of comics, kung fu, and pop culture of all sorts.
Exactly. I'm Kurtis Fujita, and this is Patrick Lugo. I'll let Patrick go ahead and do his introduction. I'll do mine, please.
So you can find me online as Plugo. I'm an author, illustrator, and comic creator. My most recent comic is A Tiger's Tale Volume 2, which was funded on Kickstarter just at the beginning of the week. And we've just reached 69 backers. We're shooting to make 100 backers before our campaign ends in about 17 days.
Excellent. And for myself, I'm Kurtis Fujita. I'm a comic book creator and also a Kung Fu instructor. And I've combined both these things into my current Kickstarter comic book campaign called Shadow Ghost. It's the Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master. Patrick and I both launched about the same time, got our initial funding about the same time, and we're just moving forward things. We'll also be, we're about halfway through our campaign for Shadow Ghost, so please check it out.
And you've just you've moved on to your second stretch goal, if I recall correctly.
First stretch goal, yeah, we just hit our first stretch goal.
Well, have you announced the second one yet?
Not yet. No. I'm gonna. You know, it's such a interesting strategy, right? Like, how do you play this? There's certain rules, but there is also no rule to a Kickstarter, right? And the first one, I'm kind of like, well, you know. Some people want to see what the next stretch goal is. Some people, I think, might feel overwhelmed by just me throwing too many stretch goals out. So I'm kind of keeping my cards close to my vest on it. I do have an idea what our next stretch goal is. I do plan on announcing it, and but time will tell. So just keep checking it out. And as always, the thing about this cool about stretch goals is once they happen, everybody retroactively that back the campaign gets it. So not just the new people. So yeah, keep your eyes on it. Soon.
Exactly. I was just last night planning to announce stretch goals today, and then I got a surge of backers this morning, so I have to kind of take a closer look at what my plan is. But there's a little bit of time for that because I really want to get to our special guest today.
Yes. I'm excited. Please, you're acquainted with him. So
yes, we are old friends. From initial, how can you say it? Like, we both initially landed in the San Francisco Bay Area at around the same time and have had adventures since. But in the time since that, he's traveled the world, and he's a writer of all sorts. So without further ado, let me introduce my longtime friend, JJ Arsenal.
Hello.
Hey guys, how you doing?
Good.
Hey there, welcome to the Comics Fu Show. But you heard the spiel already.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I'm really pleased. Kurtis, I wasn't familiar with your work before I caught the intro there, and that's really exciting. I'm looking forward to going over there and supporting your project as well as Patrick's, which I was on that first Tiger Tales Volume 1 promo through Kickstarter, and I was really excited for you, Patrick, and I'm so glad that you're back with another one.
Yeah, you selected a sketch variant, which was so awesome because I was just sitting there, okay, I'm going to draw something that I know, you'll get.
And, it was so cool.
You got it.
Yeah, it was so cool. And the Patrick, when the package arrived, Patrick, and it was like unboxing, like pulling it all out, and my family was they know about you because they've heard the stories of back in San Francisco and the Bay Area in the day, and so we were all very excited.
That's
Oh, that's
excellent.
awesome.
I have to compliment you right off the bat on the mantle there. I see, the Dao and the Jin. I see both of the blades, although one of them's technically a knife, as we know, right? But
Yes.
that it's so nice not to see the random QVC katana, on somebody's mantelpiece, to see real, authentic, good weaponry over there.
Both of those are from the Seven Dragon Wells Forge in China, and my teacher, Chen Zhanghua, who is like Joseph Chen, who's lived in Canada and is from China originally, he worked with the forge to get both those blades made. They're Damascus steel, and yeah, they're just beautiful. I love them so much.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Well played, sir. That's all I can say.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I'm not sure I'm fully worthy of those blades, but I have them. So
Oh, that's excellent. So great. So great. Very good.
You never know when the zombie apocalypse will just kick in.
yeah, I'm ready. As my last name will attest, it's a French version of the word arsenal, and I tend to love weapons. I do have quite a few.
That's great. That's awesome. Very good.
Right. So we've all heard the adage of the pen is mightier than the sword, right? But wouldn't a combo of the both leave you in the best position? Right.
I think so. When diplomacy fails, sometimes there is it's good to have your weapon with you.
Definitely. And how did both of you become acquainted with each other? I'd be curious just to hear a little of the origin story about how you both know each other.
Patrick, you want to start with that?
Sure. Oh, well, Curtis, as there's San Francisco is like has a gravitational pull for all sorts of characters, as you know. And then within San Francisco itself, it's like, I didn't really know it at the time, but it's always comprised of these little cells of like radical resource sharing individuals that just, are sharing flats and, resources to make a living in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And so once I made the trip via Greyhound from New York to the West Coast, on the list was looking up the friends who had gotten to San Francisco before me. And one was a how would I say, like a DJ of some renown, for this for the scene of the 90s.
Very much so.
I kind of looked him up in San Francisco, and he, was in one of these classic San Francisco flats, sharing it with a handful of other creatives. Among them was JJ.
Cool.
Yeah, that's right. Our mutual friend was DJ Dante, who was a house DJ, and I got that right. He was mostly house, right? Mm-hmm. And Patrick showed up, and I just remember us immediately connecting over comics because we were both big comic fans. And the Grant Morrison series at the time, The Invisibles, was really popular. And Patrick's like, well, you guys got to read this. And he would bring it over all the time and drop off the most recent volume or the issue, and we would just pour through it as a household. I mean, it was so mystical and it had everything in it, and it kind of created a couple different factions in the Bay Area. Like, you were in the Ashby house over across in Oakland or close to Berkeley, and then we were in the Fulton Street house. And so there was a lot of like cross-pollination and hanging out, and we would get together, and yeah, it was just amazing. And Patrick became a dear friend pretty much at the moment I met him. And yeah, and we've kind of drifted in and out over the years because I left the Bay Area and went to Hawaii, and then ended up in Canada. So I'm glad that I got to keep that connection.
That's great.
Indeed. Yeah, and you'll notice the whole concept of like houses because it was all this is so long before Game of Thrones, right?
I know. Tim, I was wondering what you're talking about. That's please explain
But
further.
oh
Different.
well, it would just because everyone lived in like these collective houses, right? It would be a house or it'd be a townhouse or a flat, and rather than just saying we're going over to Dante's house or we're going over to Patrick's house, we just adopted the name of the street for the house,
Yeah.
So it was the house on Fulton Street, the house on Ashby Avenue, that just became the Ashby house. And then because with all of these houses, it was a constant rotating cast. People would stay and have their room, and then other people would be like, all right, I'm gonna go to Hawaii, I'm gonna go to India. So they'd get sublets, or they'd just, they'd move out, they'd fall in love and move out, and someone else would move in. So it was always this like, bubbling cauldron of like, what's the latest project? Who's doing what? What's the people got into cooking, people got into DJing or whatever. And so the house would kind of reflect the interests of who was involved in what at any given time.
That's cool.
Yeah, I love that about it. I mean, the house was a nexus point. They were anchors for these communities as that we were connected to. And I remember in your house, you guys were making music, you were doing comics, there was DJing going on. We had, in the Fulton house, I was really heavy into poetry at the time. So I was writing a lot of poetry, was very into that, was kind of checking out that scene in San Francisco. But we had, Dante was DJing. We had a friend of ours, Jason, who was super into plants and like the emerging organic landscaping and plant movement and sustainability and even 100-mile diet before there was such a thing, or it was a catchphrase. So yeah, it was really something to be part of.
That's great. When I was in the Bay Area, similar thing. It's like, we all come from different communities, and then when you get to a place, it's almost like a comic convention too. It's like when you get to a place and you're just like, there's other people like me, and there's a community like me, right? And this is all pre-internet. And it's so gratifying because, a lot of times we're just kind of like, disparate all across the place, and you don't always know if there's other people with that same mindset or interests, right? So that's excellent.
Yeah, it's good to, I think it's like gravity. Once there's enough mass, it starts to attract things to it. And we all pull each other into each other's orbits in those instances. And I'm just really grateful for that, because it is a constant thread throughout my travels and the various places that I've gone to live in, that you find the people that you're going to have these connections with. So
definitely. And did both of you share a mutual interest in the martial arts aspect? Was that something that came later, or was that right hitting the ground running? How did that come about?
I mean, I had 2 weeks to find a job and find a place to live when I landed in the Bay Area. Wow. And so it was literally between a t-shirt shop or a small import-export business that also had a B2B publication. That B2B publication also was Kung Fu Magazine. And so it just kind of, very quickly I was like, I can work here. And then so like my life in the Bay Area was inexplicably, I totally mangled that word, but you get it. It just was intertangled with Kung Fu from the word go.
Wow. Wow. And how about for yourself, JJ? Was that something that was part of your life at that point, or did it come later, or how did that factor?
It's a thread that's kind of come in and out. It's kind of surfaced and resurfaced. I had done a little bit of martial arts, Japanese, I think Yushiru, when I lived in Florida, because that's where I grew up. And I didn't have a very good instructor. He was pretty severe, and not in a very disciplined way, but in a very kind of like rigid way. And so he had kind of turned me off from it, and I had very much been attracted to and wanted to do more martial arts. So, I was at a bit of a nadir when we were living in the Bay Area and not seeking out and doing that. But when I ended up coming to Canada, I really wanted to do more martial arts. And I wanted to do a style that was like engaged, that was a potentially sparring or fighting style that had practical real world application to it. And I was starting to look at, what was I going to take? And my wife at the time was like, well, you should do Tai Chi. And I was like, Tai Chi's slow. I don't want to do slow Tai Chi. And she's like, there's martial Tai Chi. And I was like, yeah, okay, let's see. And I just happened to run into this man, Joseph Chen, who was doing Chen style Tai Chi Chuan. And it was very martial. And I fell in love with it. Like, I just love it. And I ended up going to China with him, which was my first foray out of North America. And it just cemented a lifelong love of martial arts, for sure.
That's great. Yeah, Tai Chi is just, again, that the stereotype, right, is that just this slow old people in the park. And even from my experience, I remember my Sifu, YC Wang, he's known for doing the Hung Gar style. And he had told me when I started, he should start doing Tai Chi. And I was like, oh my God, this is so boring. Like, just an old man in the park. And I was, I'm like 5'8", but of the students that were there, everybody was roughly my size. So when we'd spar, I could kind of outmuscle them and do this and that. And then one day, some big bruiser from Seattle came in. He had done Kung Fu, 6 foot something, and he just demolished me, like, just without a doubt. Nothing worked. I was like, okay, well, maybe I should do what Sifu told me. Maybe he knows what he's talking about. For a year, I did Tai Chi. And when that year passed and I was paired up with him again, the situation changed. Let's just put it that way. In fact, not to go too far into it, but the end of the engagement, shall we say, or the exchange, I guess is a nice way to put it, is he threw a kick at me and I caught it and pulled it and then threw him. My Sifu would have a couch, and you always knew you were about to get thrown because he would maneuver you in push hands, and you look behind and you'd see the couch, and as soon as you saw the couch, you go, oh crap, here, boom, and then you just fly into the couch. Yeah. And so I maneuvered him to the couch, and the couch was right behind me, and I just launched him, and he hit the couch, got out, was upset, walked away. And my Sifu, being a good teacher, he doesn't want to play favorites. He always pretends he's reading his newspaper. And as the guy walks by, he just casually pulls his newspaper down, looks at me, and is like, "You got him," And
yeah.
Tai Chi, right? Of all things, I mean, people have no idea how potent of a martial art it is, right?
Yeah, that was my experience, and as I got into it, and I know this is a recurring theme with most martial arts, but I love that there's sort of levels to Tai Chi. There's the simple, you're catching a hand and you're doing a slight twist and you're pushing them back out of their space, or you're using that maneuver to get in closer, or you're using it to damage that limb, and I mean, it can get more and more aggressive. And for me, what really sealed the deal is I went to Regina with my teacher, and to see his first disciple, and we went there to train, and we're hanging out. And there was a gentleman in the room who was a firefighter. The guy was built, like, he was lean. He wasn't thick, but he was like lean and cut and worked out. And he was over 6 foot something. And my teacher was like, he's like maybe 5'6". 5'7", and he went and did push hands with the guy, and the guy would just like pop and fly across the room and just like collapse. And I'm just like, how is this little Chinese guy just destroying him? And then my teacher's like, okay, well, now JJ, you push with him. And I was new at the time, and the guy just was tossing me around like a rag doll. And that's when I really understood. I was like, okay, there's something here. That's when I first got that, like, oh, internal martial arts is like a thing, that there's something here that's not just muscular, that it's that, there's control and finesse in the way that you move energy. And I just found that really compelling. And like all things in my life, I felt like, okay, well, I chose like one of the hardest things to learn. Okay, here we go.
No, definitely. And, you saying that now, it kind of an epiphany, live on the stream for me is, it got to a point where, training martial arts, and I try and express this to my students. I'm fortunate in the sense that there's a certain level of, like they say in law enforcement, escalation of force, right? And whenever the few times I've been in a situation where I had to use my martial arts in a real world situation, it was never that. It was always the correct amount of force that I gave to the aggression that the person was giving. It was never like somebody just shoved me and then, like break the neck or something crazy like that, But now thinking about it, I have to attribute that to Tai Chi, and I have to attribute that to push hands. Push hands, the practice of Tai Chi allows you to understand the amount of force to use and to not use, right? The restraint in that setting. And it never occurred to me until you mentioning that now, that that's most likely where I got that from, is the practice of Tai Chi. There's a certain intrinsic morality to it and karma, especially the push hands, right? Where you know, it's like if they don't attack you and you're doing push hands, there's nothing for you to really do. You know, it's a 1-for-1 ratio, and that's something so special to that art. You know, I would say. You know, so yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, like that, the what you're saying there, just in the measure of force. And I mean, it correlates with sort of the way that force is applied in a country like Canada, where I live now, which has a very different way of looking at the use of force than in some cases in the United States, where the law stipulates that the amount of force that you can use for self-defense and preservation of life and property has to be just, you know, commiserate like to the actual amount of force that you're receiving. So like you said, somebody breaks in your house and they slap you, you're not allowed to just break their neck. There has to, and the law measures that also in a way that it's like, if you're a trained martial artist, there's an expectation that you know how to measure and respond. And that's really quite interesting. So I mean, that's just a quick observation I had on what you said.
Yeah,
that's why you have to register your hands as deadly weapons, right? But JJ, you once were telling me a story that stuck with me since, about push hands gone wrong during your travels.
Oh yeah.
Oh boy.
You want to hear that?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Yeah, we were in China. We were in Shandong province, and I'm gonna butcher the Chinese names, but I think we were in a city called Weifeng, and there hadn't been a lot of Westerners there at that time, and we were there to do like a push hands competition. And you know, to be honest, as Westerners, the Chinese people that were living there were very gracious and welcomed us with open arms, but at the same time they didn't want to necessarily lose to a Westerner. And so my friends were there and they were doing a push hands competition, and I don't think it was intentional, but one of the Chinese people competing against a friend of mine from Georgia basically did an arm grab and used like a forearm and caught his arm and did a little bit of a maneuver, and his arm just popped. Like you could hear it in the room. It went pop. And he just turned and he's holding his arm, and he went back to Master Chen, my teacher, and you know, the competition stopped, and they took him to a bone setter and a doctor there in China. And I mean, it changed the whole dynamic, and we realized like, ooh, that was very intense. And they went and did an x-ray, and he had a spiral break that ran from the elbow up to the top of the arm, and it just went all the way up. Gosh. And the interesting part of it is the bone setter says, okay, well, I'm going to try to like set the bone, and you got to get him out of here. You got to take him. He has to go home. And so the bone setter grabbed his arm and just did his thing. And Todd just passed out. Like the pain just knocked him out. And they wrapped the arm, put it in the sling. My teacher did that little technique where he presses here and woke him up. And he's like, okay, well, we've got to get you out of here. And so we had maybe a 14-hour bus ride to get back to Beijing. And then we had to go to the US consulate to get him out. So that took 2 days before he got in a plane. 13-hour flight to San Francisco, another 6-hour flight to Georgia, and then into a car and over to the hospital. And the doctors are like, okay, we're going to have to break the arm again to set the bone because it's probably not right. And Todd's like, oh my God. And they said, so we're going to take you in, do an x-ray. Took him in, did the x-ray, brought him back out. And the doctor is like, I'm not doing anything. This arm is perfectly set. And they just put him in a cast and sent him home. So I mean, part of that story is, a testament to the power of the push hands that was happening, and also a testament to Chinese bone setters, because they're amazing.
And in some cases they're one and the same, right? The master learns the bone setting as their day job. I got a push hand story. I'm sorry. I hate to come.
I'd love to hear it.
God, I love push hands. So for those of you that don't know push hands is basically it's the manifestation of the strategies and the implementation of like a sparring for Tai Chi using the techniques. You could say it's akin to wrestling. If you've done Wing Chun, it's similar to Chi Sao, but it's this interesting range that's grappling, but not exactly grappling. It's like joint locking and grappling. It's that. And one of the big components is your arms are intertwined with your partner, and you're trying to essentially pull or knock each other off balance. And so it relies heavily on sensitivity in terms of physical contact. Right? When you're this close to somebody, like you're wrestling, you can't see everything, so you have to rely on the actual tactile response. So I was in Hong Kong, and this is something almost happened to me like that, and which is when you go as a foreigner, right? And I think Americans especially sometimes forget when they go to another country, you're a foreigner. It's you're not an American in this country, you're the foreigner. And the lesson for me is I was doing push hands in Victoria Park. In Hong Kong, which is like the central park of Hong Kong. And the beautiful thing about Victoria Park is you go there on a Sunday and there's just martial arts, there's Kung Fu everywhere. There's people doing Tai Chi over here and Hung Gar and Bagua. It's like a farmer's market of Kung Fu. It's amazing. And my Sifu took us to the park to meet a group of Tai Chi practitioners and to do push hands with them. And as JJ probably knows, once you do push hands, you actually find out what somebody's personality is. They can smile at you and be nice and cordial, but as soon as it goes into physical contact and you're essentially sparring with them, the real person comes out, whether it's aggressive, giving, what have you. So I was about 19, weighed like a buck 10 max, and I just a scrawny kid, but I was fairly competent at push hands, and I got paired up with a gentleman, middle-aged man doing push hands. And I always found that it was easier for me to do push hands with my eyes closed. I could just focus on the tactile response. And I was doing push hands with this gentleman, and I kept countering him. I didn't push him, but he couldn't get me. And I didn't think about how that looked, a 19-year-old kid doing push hands, countering somebody with his eyes closed. And as my eyes closed, I didn't realize that all the classmates were watching, so there's a crowd of people. And as I'm doing push-ups, I keep countering, and I guess he lost his cool. He got fed up with this kid kind of showing him up. So he spun over and he grabbed my arm, he grabbed my wrist, and he grabbed the back of my elbow like this. And he went for an arm break, which is he's trying to separate the radius and ulna from the humerus, right? But what made it so nasty is he didn't just go for the snap. He yanked so that the radius and ulna started to actually separate from the humerus like this, and then he went up the middle to break. So it wasn't just like a lock. He was actually going to go break my arm in front of everybody. And my Sifu always told me to push hands. He said, "Don't go against the force. Whatever the force is, just go with it." And so as he pulled, it was like Obi-Wan. I could hear my Sifu saying, in his Cantonese accent, "Hey, no go against force." So I just stepped in the direction he was pulling. My arm kind of caught up with itself, locked back into place, and the break was fine. And then I realized what he did. And the lesson is it's a fine line when you go to those other countries. You don't want to make yourself look bad. You don't want to make your Sifu look bad or your clan look bad, but you can't make the other people look bad. And so sometimes you got to take the L just to be cool. There's a grace and a dignity in losing if you know that you could have won, and that's such a hard thing as a Westerner and as an American to understand, right? Is to save face is everything in these communities, So I too could have been rushed. I could have been. This was about 98, 99. So oh wow, we may have if it was around that same time, we may have caught up with each other at the hospital back in the day.
Yeah, I felt very much like I was in their culture, their world, and to be respectful. And I just through the virtues of what I was doing at the time, I was very curious, so I wasn't, asserting myself in any way. And I saw we had some young push hands champions who were on the Chinese Olympic team who came out with us in Jinan, and I watched real like challenges, like in the classic kung fu movie style of challenges. Like somebody shows up and they're like, "Oh, you know so and so, I'm gonna face you. Let's do this." And so these guys from a rival school showed up and they're like, "We're here to challenge you. We heard you're here." And so, you know, my teacher, it wasn't challenging us per se, but it was challenging that whole lineage, which was through Hong Junsheng, who was a student of Chen Fa-ka, who was a very famous Tai Chi martial artist in China. And so they're like, "We're here to challenge." And the young guy who was on the Chinese Olympic team put himself forward and was like, "I will face them." And so the whole room, which had chairs, all the chairs just move out of the way. A push hand circle forms, and then they just go at it. And the young guy, I mean, he was 19. I pushed with him. He was just incredible. Like, I mean, he's a national athlete. We're talking top tier athlete here. And he pushed this guy and turned him so hard that the guy's shoe exploded. Like it went poof, and his foot slid out of it. And he went down, and he backs up, and the guy stood up, and he was fully defeated. And he just like does his thing, and he starts going to leave. And my teacher goes and cuts him off, and was like, "Where are you going?" So we've lost face. We're leaving. And my teacher's like, "No, stay, have lunch with us. We're push hands. We're like, we're training. It's okay." And just brought them into the situation as guests then. And I remember seeing it, and it was like a few things struck me. One, there was just this real earnestness in the people's desire to do their practice at the highest standard that they could. And they also wore their defeat in a very honest way that was different than in the West, where we'll still proud boy and be like, "Oh, I could have got him." It was just very, okay, I was defeated, I've lost. And now and so it was just really interesting for me to see those dynamics in martial arts. And I really quite appreciate the differences there.
Definitely. That's the culture, right? And that's, somebody asked me, like, have you used your Kung Fu? It's like every day. I mean, it's like every day. And I'm not talking like, I'm washing dishes, doing the cloud hands as I'm washing the dishes or anything like that, right? It's the techniques and the skills are the manifestation of the philosophy, right? And the philosophy you apply everywhere, and the dignity, like what you described about your teacher, that's, because it's the easiest thing to stomp on somebody when they're down, but it takes a real classy person and a very strong person to be that gregarious. So that's great. That's excellent. But yeah, Tai Chi, right? Just slow old stuff for old people, right? Isn't
Yeah, I know. I remember my teacher telling me this, this was developed for battlefield combat. I was like, oh, that's a very different definition than what you hear people saying when, the Tai Chi Society is talking about doing like Yang style or something.
Yeah. And wouldn't you say, I mean, I'd be curious both about it. I mean, when people talk about what is the most popular Kung Fu style or Chinese martial art, for me, it's Tai Chi. You think about it, it's such a great art that you can distill it away from the martial aspect, and just the health benefits alone.
Yeah.
So, but I have to cut myself off and help Patrick wrangle me in, because I could go for like 3 more hours if we're talking about Tai Chi and push hands. Patrick, can you please help me get us back on track so we can talk about more than just this? Because I will do that. So please.
Well, I mean, I can share I've shared my story, my Tai Chi stories with both of you. So let me bring it a different angle. Jerry, I was reading your script, and I noticed one of the scenes that really drew my attention was one of the training sequences. They're using swords in this instance, but so all of this talk of push hands and impromptu training sequences got me thinking, clearly you've incorporated martial arts into your writing in ways that are more than just, writing a good fight scene. But maybe you could elaborate on that particular thing while I, before I pull up some paragraphs that we could look at and really break down, Yeah.
I mean, it's is it appropriate that I just kind of start with like what I'm kind of working on right now, just quickly, and then I can get into that fight element? Yeah.
Give us,
Yeah, so-
we're on the elevator to the penthouse suite with the president of the company. So
Cool.
here's
All
your
right.
chance.
Okay, here we go. Well, I'm writing a book right now, and the working title is Future King. And Future King, it's a feudal punk telling of the fabled return of King Arthur, and he's returned to fulfill his destiny to free humanity from the shackles of a future corporatocracy. And in it, Lancelot and the typical Arthurian characters come into it, but they have a bit of an influence of some of the Asian fighting styles and some of the European fighting styles. I have kind of looked into European sword play and studied that for this book as well, but also just some of the influences there. And in that particular training montage that you're talking about, Patrick, there's a couple of things I'm doing there. One, I'm showing that Lancelot is an incredibly adept and proficient and natural fighter. It's the only real talent he has, is he's this person that can slip into that sort of space of singularity and engage in combat from there, and is quite proficient at it naturally, but has also learned techniques over time. And in that particular training montage, he's on a team of basically futuristic gladiators that are owned by the company, and he's the captain of that team, and he's there to train the team on how to fight. Now they're using armor, and that armor would look very futuristic, like Future Knight to some degree. You're going to have full cuirass, you're going to have placards and falds, armets with the face shield that goes up, but we're also incorporating, it's like carbon fiber technology, robotic assisters, some smart thinking into the armor as well. And they're training to get ready to fight. And he has a bit of a bet going with his lieutenant that he thinks armor is a weakness. It's a dependent object that the team uses because they know they can depend on it to turn a sword blow or to throw a bolt if somebody's firing a bolt at them. And he wants to prove that he's somebody that doesn't depend on it. So in this thing, he strips down his armor and goes right down to his training, shorts, and has told his lieutenant to remain in his armor, and they're going to have a combat. And they spar. And I think you have noticed, you probably both noticed if you read it, the Tai Chi stuff definitely is there. Like Lancelot is preferring to get inside, to be close, to be in contact. He's not like you see most fights where people are trying to create distance and they're doing this at each other. He's wanting to like get in there and get against the person, grab the limbs, use the sword as an extension of self in that particular moment in order to, engage in combat. And so, yeah, it's definitely the influences there.
So this is the paragraph. I wanted to zoom in on this paragraph because I just think it would be such a great opportunity to break down, the script or how one would try and convey this into panel by panel sequences, or were this a page, or like just how would a fight choreographer break this down scene for scene versus a comic artist breaking it down panel for panel. And so
would you like me to read it out loud, or should we just leave it up on screen?
I think it'd be excellent.
Awesome.
Yeah. Sagramore came at him, sure and fast, with a perfect and efficient diagonal slice. But the captain already moved deep into the intimate danger zone of his personal space. Lance preferred to be up close, inside, hands on. Sagramore's cutting arc put both his arms at the opposite side of his body, endangering his flank to Lancelot, who grinned like a tiger who knows it's about to eat meat. His blunted blade struck savagely at Sag's armor, the plates of which were hyperextended by his twisting, striking motion, exposing the undermail protecting his abdomen. The blow echoed through the room, and Sagramor's voice rung out in the thud of pain through his mic. "I'd have cut you through your guts," Lancelot said, still close to Sagramor, who recovered, though still winded, and swept upward with a swift counterstrike. Being unable to breathe or wounded was no excuse not to fight. The second lieutenant knew it was the difference between a professional and a dead Vendible. His sword carved upwards, but Lancelot's was already coming down hard at the elbow crook, slamming into the armor couture on his right arm. Probs a severed limb, dominant one at that. Months of training with an interface and bionics.
Excellent. Please tell me there'll be an audiobook of this at some point with you reading, because that was riveting.
I hope so.
I love it. I love it. And I love, there's so many things in there that if you're a martial artist or somebody that's done a combat art, that you're like, yes, I get that. Or I remember that moment. Like the tiger who's about to eat meat. I can't tell you the times that somebody of a high level or my grandmasters did something to me, or I did something stupid. And that was the exact look. It's like, oh, you like to play. Like now you're in over your
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Excellent stuff. I love it. And I love that part about getting to the inside, right? The inside versus the outside is such an important, and we're not just talking distance, but we're talking about the outer gate to the inner gate, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is a huge thing. Oh, that's excellent. I love it.
So Curtis, put on your comic book breakdowns hat.
Sure.
What do you think?
Yeah, I'd love to hear this. What do you think?
Let me one moment. Let me just channel the spirit of the Shadow Ghost comic and put on my Shadow Ghost cap. I was waiting for that.
No, keep that on, please.
Keep it on.
We'll consider it the thinking cap for this sequence.
This is the thinking cap. All right, now I'm channeling the power of the Shadow Ghost comic book. No, I think if it was as far as panels, you'd start with like wider shots in the beginning, definitely like an establishing shot. I think people think of establishing shots in terms of like establishing a location, but I think for a fight scene, you have to have an establishing shot to establish the position of the characters, the distance, and all of those things. So I would definitely consider having a wide shot and then moving into close-ups. And as there's those little moments where there's kind of a twist, like that diagonal cut, diagonal cuts tend to, for some reason, seem faster. Even though a vertical cut is most likely the fastest cut because it's going with gravity, but there's a certain unexpectedness to a diagonal technique in martial arts that just kind of makes it appear faster. And so I would say have diagonal panels, just to kind of cut through and kind of speed it up. Definitely. And yeah. And I might even go, Patrick will come in shortly. I might even go so far as to that part with the grinning like a tiger about to eat meat. I might harken back to
just see like a close up even of like Lancelot's mouth, and he's like,
yeah. And I might actually do it black and white, because just having black and white so that moment just kind of sits a little bit longer. So those are kind of the things. And then at the end, I would say when he's lecturing him, explaining what he did wrong, returning back to that establishing shot, because then everything's revealed. So that's kind of I love it. I think it's great. What was the genesis of this? I mean, obviously, King Arthur, but how did you decide to come about using that as kind of the impetus for this story? How did that come about?
Using the Arthurian legend itself, or I've loved it ever since I was a little kid. And there was the movie Excalibur that came out in the 80s, which is it's just such a classic. And my dad let me watch it when it was probably not age appropriate, and it was just seared in my mind, these moments and like the glinting armor and the whole element of it. And so for me, that's always been quite a strong thing. This particular story has been around with me since I was a teenager, and as you progressed and I had raised kids and had a life, I kind of sat on the side. And about 12 years ago, I started really taking an interest in writing it, and had put a lot of time into taking notes and doing an outline, because that's my process. I tend to like to create an outline. And the original intent was for it to be in comic. And I kind of, now as we're talking about it, I kind of should have sent you that fight in the comic format, because I do have it written out as panels.
Nice.
and pages. And I've written the first 6 issues of the comic out already, and have done that as a comic script. And it's kind of the genre that I've been most interested in doing professionally for a very long time, as Patrick can tell you. I mean, like, I've done a couple pitches as well. But just to kind of bring it back around, for me, there was a point about a year and a half ago where I was like, okay, I feel a real urgency to tell this story. And I had written the comic script, and I was like, I have to find an artist. I have to work with an illustrator. I have to find the coloring. I do illustration work, but to be honest, I do not think myself good enough to execute it the way that I see it in my mind. And so there was this, this kind of humming and hawing and a back and forth, and the script was writing really well. I was getting through it. And then I had this moment where it's like, well, what if I just back off of the script in comic format for a moment? And what if I just try writing it as a book, and let's see if it wants to write itself that way? And I mean, really, whether that's anthropomorphizing or not, it was like, I just really wanted to kind of let it express itself the way that it wanted to be executed. And I started writing it as a book, and it flowed, and it was just coming and coming and coming. And I'm like, okay, well, here we go. I think that this is how I need to write this. And so I always think, though, about the comic aesthetic while I'm writing the paragraphs. And with that particular one, I was thinking about it much like you were saying, Curtis, like about like, okay, like how could this look? In my mind, I was seeing like the contextual shot that you were talking about. I was seeing it as like a lit circle with like dark edges, and you're seeing the two of them, this like half naked man sitting there with a sword facing a knight, and how absurd that contrast would look. And thinking about, even like the strike against the elbow, that is like a close-up, and you're seeing like the armor's absorbing that impact. But if that were a sharpened blade or a real combat, would it be enough? And so yeah, that's been my process around this particular writing exercise.
Nah, definitely. And what I love is, you have that one great characteristic of somebody that not only is passionate about their work, but knows about the work. You have conviction. Like when you're reading it, there's a swiftness to the way you say it. There's a defining way that you say it. And that means your art, you appreciate it, and you believe in it, Mm-hmm. I kind of, that's why I love comic books. I mean, I think comic books, we always have the alter egos, right? There's the normal person in this, everybody has that thing, whatever that thing is, whether it's martial arts or art, where you come out, where, full tilt, and you can tell that just from me. That's why I really hope, not only when the book comes out, but I really hope that you do a narration of that, because that was absolutely riveting. I caught myself, leaning forward into the into the screen. So.
Wow, thank you, Curtis.
Yeah. I keep visualizing that chainmail as more like hexagonal, just to be able to do like a close up of the actual hexagons separating to indicate like that sequence when you say he's overextended and the armor's been stretched, and just to see that, like, to play with those patterns. But yeah, I mean, the one thing I've been learning a lot about recently, has been like, maybe it's new theories on how to get comics now that Scholastic and all of the big publishers are really, zooming into graphic novels, especially for young readers, and for like even the new genre, like early readers, kids who are just transitioning from picture books into comics, so there's a lot of talk now about like writing the script for the artist, right? So in a way, like the script sample that you sent us would be appropriate to give to an editor who's gonna give that to an artist. So this way, it's almost like they don't even want to deal with panel layout or any of that stuff anymore. Like they want that to happen.
Really?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. Like they
Oh,
want that to
interesting.
happen in the thumbnailing process after the story's been written.
Oh, really? Like the
So
Marvel.
there's
Oh, that is interesting to me.
so it's like Marvel method, but just a little bit beyond, because you're trying to tell the story to your artist, right? And to give the artist the complete immersion experience, and then let the artist take that and turn that into a thumbnailing process. It's really weird for me because I think you both know, like I tend to work like a page at a time. I happen to have this, so let me just share. Like when I look at a script, right, I kind of look at how it's going to sit on a page, you know, panel by panel. But what the new thinking now is that you do the individual panels. You look at the story and then you break down the individual panels, and then you decide how many of them fit on a page or fit on a double page spread. So it's just interesting because in a way, what you sent would still work now as a graphic novel script.
I'm really glad to hear that, because I have to say, as a writer, the traditional, like, you know, page, dot, panel number, description, text breakdown, I mean, it makes sense on some level, but it's also very restrictive and a little bit artificial. And I keep thinking about, and this actually comes back to you and I, Patrick, like you read a script of mine from a while, like a long way back, for an actual comic that I illustrated, which was a poem I wrote called God Favors the Rebel. And your feedback at the time really made me pause and think about it, because you were saying something to the effect of, and I'm paraphrasing you now, which was like, oh, well, there's a lot of detail about how this page is supposed to work, and I'd have to think about how I would lay that out. And it translated in my mind was, oh, maybe I gave him too much restrictive information if he was the illustrator. Maybe I'm not giving the illustrator enough room to interpret the page and panel layout and structure. And then I thought about, like, oh, well, like Alan Moore does that. He has like 4-page descriptions of a single panel, and it's like the artist must be like, oh my goodness, what am I supposed to do here? So hearing you say that is like means a lot to me, because I think intuitively prefer to have it more the way that I've written it in the book, which is, here's what the feel is. You take this and think about what it's supposed to do and how it's supposed to look.
Totally. I could even see it as you're talking about King Arthur. You look at the old books and prints, right? It was like I want to say like a storybook in the like a kid's book, but I mean, in the sense that you would have like a full page illustration, right? Like even like Gustave Doré and those things. I could totally see like somebody almost like a role playing game kind of quality illustrations, and then your full text. I mean, I think that's, there's so many ways, but that's great. Great stuff.
That's what you just said is Curtis, is something I very much want to do. I mean, I haven't thought about publication yet, but when we get there, that's what I want to have, is some big full page panels in there.
Yeah. I mean, that what Curtis just described is also very much what publishers, the big the big three that are left, are very much looking at, is that hybrid mode where using the sequential art to communicate what can only be communicated with sequential art, and then stopping, and then having, the Alan Moore method, where there's some stuff that you have to read, so it's really, I mean, just in the past 2 years or so much is changing dynamically. Like there's a constant debate now about what is a proper, script format.
Yeah.
But speaking of which, I wanted to share this one.
Yeah.
Right. Because this is something that you wrote in a more traditional comic script.
Very much so. Yeah.
Style.
Yeah, this goes back a little ways. I found Tyler Jenkins online when I was looking for somebody to maybe do a pitch to Image, and Image didn't pick it up at the time. It was kind of around the time that American Vampire was coming out. And this was sort of a vampire story, but it was going to center around the American Civil War. And just as a really interesting aside, Patrick, this particular comic script that I wrote here was a dream that I had when I lived in San Francisco.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so Tyler and I worked together. We pulled a few pages out in order to kind of prepare and get it ready. And he did the illustration, the inking, and he did the color on this. And I loved it. I really love his style. It's so expressive. I mean, yeah, you've got this pioneer there who's taking a piss away from his camp, and you have the vampire just sitting there in a stand of birch trees ready to take him and get some food.
That's great. And I love the colors. I mean, that really nice, blue and orange, the complementary colors, and it just has a certain texture to it. It's great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this was a project where I also, read some of your script, and
That's right.
we talked about what's involved in a script in terms of just direction and context, and it taught me a lot. It really helped me get a bunch of like ideas that now that I'm talking to a lot of other writers and comic artists, I can really kind of talk to them with some measure of experience. So there was an annoying kid who followed him around, shaking my head. There's more people on the screen than the chat.
Help us change that.
That's a different comic. Okay, so
thank you, Alan, for chiming in. We always appreciate people, But
he was hoping to see that comic out in the wild. But I mean, it's a good example of the quality of the work that was being delivered in that little sample.
Yeah. It might be something that someday I bring forward. To be honest, I don't know if Tyler will catch wind of this or not, but I was looking, I think, on his Instagram or his Twitter the other day when I was thinking about this conversation we were about to have, and he had a post that he's like, oh, I'm might be looking or willing to take on some projects in February. And I was like, could we just do this whole script I wrote and just get it done? But it's not the time right now.
Bring it to Kickstarter.
Yeah.
I know. Well, and I definitely would love to, and I will revisit that story at some point. But there's also like this, when you're in that process and you're in the zone, there's very little that I want to do externally to kind of dilute the energy of what it is I'm working on. And I mean, with a book and with comics and scripting and illustrating, you have to be kind of muleish. You're on a marathon. You are running a marathon, and it's going for sometimes years at a time. And so, yeah, I have a very disciplined process right now where I'm not working on anything else. I'm just writing the book. I love to play video games sometimes. I haven't touched a video game in a year and a half because I just have to write and write and write.
No, definitely. There's a certain discipline and a huge sacrifice, right? To do that. It's like, as I was closing in on finishing my book, I had actually have a talk with my wife, and she's so supportive. I said, okay, at this point, for the next nth amount of months, I can't do anything else. I mean, I'm like on standby mode. Like I'll do the dishes, I'll help with this, I'll help with that. But like any other functions that aren't necessary outside of the house or meetings or whatever, like I'm going to be in that room over there, Yeah. And unfortunately she understood, and she was down with that. But it takes that, right? Because you have real life going on outside of the comic book. If the comic book was all we had to do, or the book, that's fine. But unfortunately, real life is happening all around that, right? So It is what it is.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I was going to ask you guys, like, what's your process? Like, how do you keep yourself focused on the mission? Does it come naturally, or do you, is it like bringing the martial arts back in a little bit that, I have to have a set training time. I don't want to miss that. Don't want to miss training. My schedule says I'm doing it at this time, whether I want to or not. I'm going to go do 100 circles. Like, what's that look like for either of you guys?
What about you, Patrick? I'll let you go first because
I mean, over the past couple of years, I've really come to rely on a series of circles of like communities of other like comic creators, writers, and stuff who are all kind of focused on elevating the game. I mean, a lot of them are focused on getting their pitches picked up, right? But there's having spent after finishing A Tiger's Tale as a singular piece, right? I spent about a year just querying it, sending it out to agents, and couldn't get an agent for it, right? So that's what had me go back and want to take it apart, deconstruct it, and that led to the Kickstarters. But along the way, it was a chance to really look at what was working in the story and bring it to other artists and other writers and get their feedback. And so it's that that kind of commitment to these other creatives who I admire, which is what's keeping me moving forward. Because I've got to meet certain benchmarks. Like the one trick that I have that's becoming a little bit of a habit is that I tend to set my bars really, really low, so that on Monday I can say these are the things I want to do, but these are the things that I want to do by Tuesday, and then I have to do them. And then once they're done on Tuesday, then the rest of the week is just formless, and then that's when I can play with ideas, get wild concepts, or doodle, or play catch up for what needs to get done by that Saturday or by that next check-in. Which is why like the Kickstarter is so important, because that's me putting all the work out there, but still saying, hey, look, watch, I'm going to upload the videos of me coloring so you could see that I'm doing the work. I'm going to redraw a scene because one of our guests, who's a shakuhachi flute master, pointed out that I didn't draw that flute correctly, so I got to now, the master pointed it out, fix that, right? So, having things that I've done quickly and early on kind of gives me the room to kind of turn back around and focus on those details.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. Yeah. For me, it's I'm a very goal-oriented person, and that's a good and negative thing because I want to see results at certain times, but I think what it is, I almost, like you said, it's a marathon, right? Not a race. And so for me, it's just the idea of setting aside the time and just putting in the hours. I'm only beholden to myself for the most part. And so the biggest thing is that every day I have to be working on it from this time. I clock in, I do the work, and then I clock out. I kind of gave up a while ago trying to say, okay, this week I'm going to get this page done, and this week I'm going to get this far, because I'll just drive myself crazy, Mm-hmm. And I'm such a perfectionist. I don't want the work to suffer. So I had to kind of reconcile that difference and just say, okay, every day I'm putting in this amount of hours. And it's, it's a horrible situation, but it really helped. And I hate to say it, but it was COVID. When COVID hit, I finally had time. I worked a job. I have martial arts school. I would get home at 11:30 at night, maybe try and visit with the wife for like a half hour or so, and then try and work on the comic book for an hour before starting the clock over the next day. And when COVID hit and everything shut down, it was like, okay, this is the moment. I can just push because everything got locked down, everything got closed. But I think it's definitely that idea of just putting in the hours, The funny thing is, like they say, the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. That's really hard. Especially when you have several main things going on at the same time.
That's so true. It's like the indie hustle. Like I think about how many, like Tiger's Tail is my number one priority, right? Just to get the things done for it. But then everything else feeds into it. Organizing this conversation, right? That took time away from actually doing colors, and yet you can't measure the value of it in and of itself, right? The value of this conversation is immense, but then the value of organizing this thing and having the consistency of a Sunday and a Tuesday live stream that we're just gonna put it out there for folks to catch, and that is part of what creates value for the campaigns. And so it's part of getting A Tiger's Tail out into the world, even though it has nothing to do with me sitting here with my pen tablet actually drawing lines.
That is the indie hustle, right? And that's the thing is everything is in service of the project. The difference is none of us can have afforded the option to go, okay, I'm just an artist. or I'm just a writer, I'm just going to do that,
Yeah.
right? No, I'm the marketer, I'm merchandising, I vouch for myself, I answer all the emails. Nobody gets that. And I think to survive in this day in space, you have to be willing and almost enjoy that aspect. Or you're just the days of I'm just an artist and I'm looking for a patron by in and of itself is kind of dead, to some degree.
Yeah.
And if you want to make it, you have to be willing to wear those hats and you have to be interested in it. And I don't think a lot of people are, or enough people are. I really do feel that if you go to art college or you go to school, to say you're a professional artist means you have to understand the business too, and be versed,
Yeah.
That's just my take.
Yeah, I wanted to say, Patrick, I'm really impressed with how out there you are and how much I see you on different platforms and how you're engaged in what you're doing. And yeah, it's inspiring because I'm still behind that. Like I'm very much underground right now. I'm not trying to actively promote or do the indie hustle like you said, Kurtis. I'm just focused on writing, and I am very much approaching the end of my first draft. I'm like literally maybe a few chapters away from the end. Like I am in climax. Everything's questions are being answered, loose ends are being tied off, and I'm going to have to switch into that mode at some point. So I kind of think of it like, there's like just a vast mycelium network that nobody's aware of, and suddenly I'm going to have to like bloom and start putting some mushrooms up in the air and growing and doing that here pretty soon. And I mean, that's a big process for me. My process on this is, I liked what you said, Kurtis, about not saying I'm going to get X done, but you're just going to put the time in, because artists generally are far too optimistic. We're like, I can get that done and nope.
Oh gosh, yeah.
No, we are not good advocates for our scheduling, and we really should accept that, especially because the nature of it is different than, let's say, plumbing. Like you can only, hook a drain up to such a degree so well. But as an artist, you can obsess. Well, I mean, did I use the right material? Is that the right way to do it? Is that the color? Should I have done this? And so we really have to give ourselves the space. And I think having sort of a general zone that you want to be in as part of your target goal is important. For myself, I have a word count that I want to hit. I want to be in the neighborhood every month. And it doesn't matter to me so much, did I get the book done? Did I get this done? Because my first estimate was like, I'm going to write a book in a year. Well, I'm at a year and 3 months right now. And I'm going to probably hit it by the end of the 3 months. So a year and 3 months isn't bad for that target. But I really should be more generous with, let's just hit a general target.
Totally. And I think the thing is as a creator, right? Nobody is going to I used to teach art and, talking about, hands, right? Hands are always hard, but nobody's going to look at the hand and say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you obsessed over that pinky, getting the correct proportion and angle, that you spent 3 hours getting that pinky. Nobody's going to give you credit for that, but everybody's going to point out that that pinky doesn't look right. I'm not an artist, but something doesn't look right. Yeah. Something doesn't look right there, Yeah. And, but what I like what you said too is that you're talking about doing things in phases. And I think that's important. I think in this day of social media, everybody wants credit for what they're doing well ahead of schedule. And even I kind of missed the mark a little bit because I started promoting mine a little too soon because I thought I had more, I was further along than I was. But I think, truth be told, I've been working on this as an idea since for like 7 years, But I think the thing is the idea of right now you put on the creator hat, you're focused on that, all hands on deck, get the product done, and then the promotion starts to happen, because there is a certain lifespan of excitement over something, and I think it's great that you're not too soon like, hey, I wrote 5 more letters, Instagram,
yeah.
Just like, So that takes a certain measure of restraint because we want to share what we're doing with people,
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's, I assume either of you've done a little bit of qigong in your time as well, there's that. I look at that process also as like a qigong thing where you're cultivating and accruing and concentrating energy in those moments, and that is not the point to start dissipating. And in the creative process I'm in, like I am in a cultivation phase right now. And in fact, just before we had this conversation, I was writing a sequence of Merlin where he's actually very quite shamanic. Like I brought him back to his Celtic shamanic roots, and he's talking about cultivating and holding energy till and getting to the point where it's almost uncomfortable for him to do so, but the longer he can hold it, the more potent that energy will be and the more focused it'll be on release. And so that I look at it that way as well. Like this is a qigong exercise. Cultivate, cultivate, cultivate. The moment will come where we're going to do the turning of the joint, and then we will begin to release.
Definitely. And there's an element of faith talking about qigong, and for those that are watching don't know, qigong, or Cantonese heigong, is the internal cultivation of energy, right? We call it qi in other countries, but basically it's the bioelectric current that runs through our body, and you're trying to cultivate that because that promotes your health and then also your martial potency, I guess you could say. But it's a delayed gratification. I would imagine everybody here to some degree has done standing meditation, which is one of the most unappealing martial arts practices in the world. And somebody says, well, what's the highest level of your kung fu? Hey, just watch. Right? Just stay there and watch me do this for an hour or two, right?
Yeah.
But you have to have a certain faith while you're standing there doing it. Why am I standing here looking like an idiot, holding two coffee cups, for hours on end? I don't feel anything, but my Sifu said to do it. You have to have an inherent faith in the overall process and an overall faith in yourself, and just a faith in something bigger than yourself, or you're never going to get to the end of any of this stuff, because I don't know about you, I would imagine you've gone through it, but there's times where I've been working on stuff and you go, why am I doing this? Like I could be enjoying life. Is anybody going to see this? I always hear about that crazy person that's, that's out in the woods, in a cave talking to themselves. Am I that person? Does that person know that person, or is that person me? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I experienced something. It's almost like there's a kind of a pain threshold that gets experienced where it becomes, with Tiger's Tail specifically, it became painful to do anything but get it done.
Yeah.
Where it was like a thing of like, oh, this is fun, but really what I want to do is that, and so it became this thing where the process of not working on it was where the pain was. So if I didn't want to feel the pain, I should go work on the project. And it was that weird inversion, because it's so common to think of it the other way. Oh, this project is a pain in the ass. I don't want to work on this. It's too hard or whatever. But at a certain point, it flipped.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a couple of things you both said that I really want to respond to there. But to just what you had just said, Patrick, is if you're experiencing pain with that because you're not expressing, I think that is probably one of the biggest indicators that there's passion there that absolutely needs to be expressed. Mm-hmm. The other thing I wanted to say is that like the cultivation, sitting in that discomfort is a part of also the martial process and the creative process. And I mean, I just feel like there's so many connections here between the creative process and the martial arts process. Is a lot of us, the uncertainty of what it is we're creating, whether anybody's going to see it or not, whether it's going to be out there, is a painful thing. And not all discomfort is bad. Not all discomfort has to be stopped. And to just kind of, my teacher is he's Taoist. And so that Taoist expression of, the highest expression is, did you come, did you create, did you make the world a better place? And did you leave and nobody even noticed? That's like the highest kind of element. Well, I mean, obviously we, breaking away from that, we do want to be eventually noticed for the work we're doing, but the process needs to be that, like, I'm doing this because it's expressing myself and it's showing me and it's bettering my own experience. And to just tie back to one other thing you said, Kurtis, was like, I was always taught that the doing the martial art was like laying the pipe and expanding, the circumference of that pipe, and the qigong was filling that pipe with the energy and the fluid that was going to express itself. And so creatively, yeah, we're cultivating, and we do at some point want to create the infrastructure for that expression to be received, and that's that marketing and the the doing the videos and doing the Kickstarter and all of that stuff that comes out, that I think is going to be really amazing, because I'm doing qigong right now. At some point I need to start laying pipe and getting it out there and having everything express itself.
Well, definitely. And oh, sorry, Patrick, go ahead.
Oh, when you're ready, I will share with you the cutting edge science of a beta reader campaign.
Okay, well, Kurtis, you were about to say something, and then I'd love to see that. I'd love to hear that.
Well, that's for later, but there's a whole, I mean, I have the graphs, I have the charts. It's a thing.
Okay.
So
no, definitely. What I was going to say is that idea of being uncomfortable and being in that moment, right? And that's the martial arts thing, right? The most severe version of that is being in a fight, right? Is having all those fears, seeing something in front of you, and then acknowledging it, not being delusional, and seeing that moment and be like, okay, we're here in this moment, and I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to accept that I'm in this situation, And there was it's an African saying, and I only heard it once, and I wish I knew the exact thing, so I'm paraphrasing, but they said, how does the lion not fear the many hyenas, the strength of the many hyenas that surround it? And it says, because he knows the strength within himself, right? And it's that idea, you look at all these challenges and you say, oh, this is so insurmountable, all these things, but then you're able to somehow look within yourself and say, but you know what? The strength that I have far exceeds these challenges, and I think that's true in any endeavor, right? You have to be able to have that, and if you lose that, all is lost. But definitely, I think it's so important. So yeah. So for those of you just turning in for just comic books, we got a little deep, but I think that's a good thing. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's all part of that creative process, and it's worth discussing for sure. Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to talk comics, Jerry, I mean, JJ, what have you been reading lately? Anything?
I'm going to be a heretic. To be honest, I haven't been reading a lot of comics because I'm writing a book. I was delving quite deeply into fantasy and sci-fi. The only comic book I've read has been Tiger Tales, Volume 1. So in the last year.
It's the only one you need to read.
I was, and yeah, I mean, as part of that sort of, I become almost myopic in my focus on what I'm doing. And I was like, okay, I'm just, and for the longest time, I only was reading comics. And when I read books, I would only read information. And so I kind of have inverted that whole process. And so, yeah, I've been reading a lot of books. So on the pop culture side, I can talk about that end of it, but yeah.
That's excellent. Do either of you ever feel that you will cut off the influence of something while you're working on it because you just don't want ideas to contaminate, or you want to stay focused, or not second guess yourself? Or is it kind of just something more fluid where, any thoughts on that aspect?
Patrick, do you want to answer that, or should I?
I mean, I think, like, I have a huge growing pile of books that I'm behind on reading, that I'm just like, the pile and I just keep adding the new stuff onto the top of it, which is fine.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think there's, like, I definitely can acknowledge, like, I'm in very much of a generative phase where I'm just putting the stuff out there. And then at a certain point, the stuff will be done. And then I could just kick back and put my feet up and then turn to that pile of things that I want to luxuriate in. But then on the other side, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks, right? It's something that that got me through the daily commute for years. And now that I work, outside of this studio, I use them when I go on my epic dog walks, right? So much so that when I put my earbuds in, you know how they make that little sound that says that they're connected? My dog knows that sound. He could be in the other room and he'll hear it and he'll be like, "Oh,
It's
it's
time.
time. I'll meet you at the door. It's time."
That's so good.
And so then during our dog walks, I'll take my dog walks with the latest epic fantasy that I've come across, and all praise to that 15-second rewind button,
Right?
Yeah. For myself to kind of answer that question, I don't avoid anything. And I always considered that to be wisdom in the past, which was, not to end up, kind of polluting your creative process or bringing in other stuff. And I mean, maybe I'm being naive. I might be. There's a good chance. But I don't feel threatened by reading other people's work right now. And in fact, I find it really important. And I feel it's exactly the same thing between writing a book and writing a comic. Is you have to, and Stephen King said this, read other people's work so that you understand the process and that you know the mechanics. And I mean, I'm reading stuff and I'm like, oh wow, that's interesting. This person's doing a first person POV on this thing, and oh, that's kind of cool the way that they're writing this. And oh, that's an interesting exercise in using an adverb, which you're kind of supposed to avoid doing. And when I'm writing comic scripts, it's the same. I will read and I will look through a lot of comics, and whether I'm reading or not, I'm just structurally flipping through and seeing the different ways that people have come up with solutions to the storytelling. And I mean, you see real masterful strokes of comic panel creation that people use, like the tightening of even sequential art down to make you feel that like locked in kind of tension of a moment, or whether they're doing a big wide kind of expressive open shot so that you're feeling that like the epicness of the landscape that someone's looking in. And I think it's just so important to be constantly touching that stone and familiarizing yourself with it. I mean, and I just, because you guys are doing a comic fu podcast, I just can't help but keep coming back to the martial arts, which is you can do your own form on your own again and again and again and again, but to come and then to push and to be with others and watch technique and see how they're doing it is a very confirming process. And I feel like it's a way that we tune our intuitions so that we really are finding the best way through a forest and a darkness that we're trying to find our way through a story.
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think it's all, the understanding that the method is a method and not the result, right? It's not the end. That's what really defines things. I think people get caught up in the method and think that that's where it ends. The method is actually just the starting point for anything, right? So definitely, and I like the idea of drawing inspiration from things that may be outside of what you think. You may be doing a martial art. Like I actually drew a lot from Watchmen, which isn't necessarily you would think like a martial arts comic book, but the idea when you look at that. I'm big into structure, like in martial arts, having the structure of the body and the formation, and understanding what stems from that. And Watchmen is like a classic example of structure. There's a certain panel layout, and it's almost like a mandala or something like that, where the structure liberates itself, And so, definitely, I have to agree with both of you. That's excellent.
Yeah, that was a very sort of Chen style statement right there. Which is, my teacher would be like, yes. I mean, it's like, that there's such a set structure that the body has to be in that's in that moment, and then there's this expansive sort of freedom within it that you're able to move from. And so again, I mean, that's that duality, that's that Taoist thing, that's the opposites, like all of that is very you know, is very legitimate to that experience.
Oh, definitely. I was just talking with two Sifus that are friends of mine, Sifu Cindy Huey and Marlene Tam. They both do Wing Chun, but they also did a lot of internal martial arts. And they were talking about how people look at their Wing Chun and they say, oh, well, other judges that term say, we just look at the hands because Wing Chun doesn't have any stance. And it was like, are you kidding me? You know, and I said, standing meditation has stance. Standing meditation has movement. That's saying, right? In stillness, there's movement. In movement, there's stillness. You know, there's only one time that you're still, and I'm not planning to get there anytime soon. So, you know, we'll just keep moving in the meantime.
Yeah. And I mean, when you see somebody who subverts it and subverts the structure, it's usually somebody that's doing it from like a master's level. And I think it's funny because you mentioned Alan Moore, but I think about Alan Moore in this particular instance and that comic Promethea that he wrote. And he, at some point, he had the whole thing turned landscape, and he was doing this like infinity symbol layout that was like completely unconventional in so many ways. And I was like, well, I mean, him and the illustrator, they're masters. Of course they can just invert that, and it doesn't come off weird or kind of tropey, or that it doesn't feel jarring compared to the traditional portrait landscape that he's been doing the whole issue. Right?
Yeah.
That was J.H. Williams III.
Yes.
Okay.
And you could just, I mean, the mind boggles at what those script instructions must have read like. You know?
I know.
Were the script instructions sideways? That's my question. Did he turn the paper?
They just showed up as a scroll. Because I mean, Promethea is just like, and that's just one example. Like, I mean, if you really go through that series, you'll see that there are certain issues where even though each page is a series of like 3 horizontal panels, as you read it, you realize that each one picks up off the next one for the whole comic.
Insane.
You know, and it's just like they just decided, okay, that's how we're gonna do this comic, as one long panorama. You know, and
I remember that issue. Just
masterful. You know, and so it's just like to have you need to have internalized so much to be able to start operating on that level.
Well, and Alan Moore's connection to magic and ritual magic and numerology is like, I mean, it's imbued in that. I think everyone's heard of the like Grant Morrison and Alan Moore magical war that's happening in comics. Like, I mean, my rational mind is like, that's very pretentious, but most of me is like, that is freaking awesome.
Oh yeah, it's amazing. I mean, eventually there has to be a documentary series about like a series about just that. About
I hope so.
A moment, you know. Yeah.
It should be like a journalistic comic about the great magic wars of comics or something. We can call it Wizards.
Have you seen that one interview with Alan Moore where I didn't realize it was a performance, where he's talking to somebody and they kind of start kind of poo-pooing the fact that he's into magic and start to dispute it. And they say, well, if you can show me something magic, and Alan Moore's, you know, deadpan, like, okay, he starts concentrating, and it's all shot like cinema verite. Like I really thought it was an interview. And then the interviewer's head explodes. And then they and it's like, you know, it's just crazy because I had no idea. I thought, oh, they're making a fool out of him. And it just, you know, it's hilarious. So Alan Moore, amazing.
I mean, I love Alan Moore. He's an iconoclast. He's like, he's one of these people who is stuck to his moral and ethical guns all the way through. And I just respect him a lot. And I mean, and he is a masterful storyteller, and he's a real magician. I mean, that's what he does. He lives it. It the same way that, you know, for us, the martial arts element might be something that we live our lifestyle through, and it informs our ethical and moral framework. That is very much for him. And you don't doubt it when you see something and you read a comic like that. And I think this is a good comic, and writer does this. They're communicating with you on a subconscious level that you don't even fully understand everything that's being said, but it's there and it's all in the sauce.
Definitely. And it's almost like with his books, you almost receive like you create like a hive mind state, right? Everybody that reads this book has this experience and this idea that this energy goes to another level and then re-influences itself. I mean, that's kind of like I kind of get the feeling like Watchmen. I mean, there's a lot of books that people read and like, okay, I have my interpretation of this, but one thing I like about Alan Moore's work, whenever I read Alan Moore's work, I feel like we're all in his world. We're not in our interpretation of his world. We're all in his world. We may see
Exactly.
but there's something very unique about that I haven't really seen that often elsewhere. And I can't put my finger on it, but maybe that's the point, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Who's the, I'm totally gapping the filmmaker's name. He wrote Mulholland Drive, Blue Velvet.
Lynch.
Lynch.
Yeah.
You're in his world. Like you're not like, you're not even a spectator. He's like sucked you into it. And he's taken your conscious mind and he's just like, you're not even having a conversation with that part of your mind. He's just having a conversation with your subconscious and your subconscious is getting it. They're like, okay, yeah, I get it. I'm on board. And you walk away afterwards and you're like, what did I just what did I just learn or experience? But I mean, Lynch does that too. It's amazing. It's an amazing power.
Definitely. It's kind of like other movies and work. It feels like you're at the museum and you can just stay there and look as much as you want. More in Lynch's work, it feels like it's a curated tour where the momentum keeps moving. You may glimpse something different on this next trip, but there's always a certain momentum and they're controlling what you see when you see it. You know, it's just, it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
Right. And then the third person in that trifecta who does movies and comics, right, would be Alejandro Jodorowsky.
Oh, come on. Right?
Right. Who,
gosh.
You know,
I don't know them. Who? Tell me.
I'm
sorry.
You've encountered the Incal, right? From Humanoids, the Incal, INCAL.
Moebius.
Oh, okay. Yes.
Right. So Jodorowsky is,
he's insane. The best way possible.
His movies are like each movie is a rite of passage, you know, not for the faint of heart. They're like true rites of passage. So the one that's most seminal is Holy Mountain, The Holy Mountain, which is a mind-altering substance for like 3 hours. You're in there, and it's like I said, it's not for the weak. But then you hear about how he did the movie and how he and his whole cast lived together for 6 months, and it's like purely like circus arts movie making.
El Topo, El Topo.
El Topo, which is you know, is that another classic, right? Is that where Blueberry? It's like
a psychedelic cowboy movie, I guess you could say.
Wow, I'm totally ignorant of his work. I have a mission now. I'm gonna go and check this out.
For fun, check out the documentary because he was going to do the original Dune movie before David Lynch.
Oh, okay.
Jodorowsky's Dune, and he had his son cast as Paul Atreides, and he literally like put his son through hell and made him study like 6 different Japanese martial arts, including pressure point fighting, just for the film. And he got Salvador Dali to come on board to play the Emperor, and he also got Orson Welles to agree to be the Baron Harkonnen for it.
Wow. And I do know about that. That's him then. Okay.
Yeah, he's amazing. And I love that movie because I saw some movie was talking about documentary was talking about Moebius, and they asked him what he thought of American comic books, and he just starts swearing up a storm in French. He goes, American comic books. He goes, I shit on them. He goes, that's what I think. He's a true artist. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. So I'm just so excited at the thought of you discovering the movies and the comics for the first time, you know?
Yeah, that's funny. It's there's lots of Venn diagrams here of what, overlapping stuff, but that was just right out of my circle at the moment. So I think I'm going to have to look that up and get in there.
Definitely.
Oh yeah.
Totally. Well, we
could go on for another bunch of hours. I mean, JJ and I have done this, well into the morning hours through the night. So,
yeah, I think, anytime you guys want to have me come and have a conversation with you again, you just let me know. Cause I think there's so much to cover here and I'm definitely looking forward to hearing more about your projects and what you guys are up to. And I want to know about the whole beta reader thing that you're talking about at some point, Patrick. We'll have to get into that, because that's definitely something I'm starting to think about from the book perspective. I have a short list of people that I'm hoping will be beta readers when I'm done. And so, yeah, it's a big process as well.
Yeah, there's a whole method. I've taken classes. There's like a whole method for how to turn your beta reading into like part of your marketing campaign so that you have people invested in the work before the work is even out there. And then there's like a way to just launch it from there. So I've got the PDFs downloaded. I've taken the class. So I'm just waiting, to apply that knowledge somehow.
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I think, with books too, I mean, it's the thing I always liked about comics is that I could consume my fiction very easily and quickly. I'm a slow reader. I'm like a plodding reader. And so for me to commit to a book, it's like, it's gotta be really good. And I'm kind of ruthless too. I get off the ride quickly if I don't think it's going the way that I want. And so, the beta reading element of a book is like, yeah, there's a commitment there for somebody for something that's, maybe 3/4 baked. And that it's definitely interesting to consider all of the things that go into it. And I'm already starting to think like, okay, well, I don't want to pre-bait any or preload people's expectations, but then what kind of questions do I need to be ready to ask at the end, or what do I need to tell them to think about beforehand? So yeah, that's a whole other thing to discuss at some point.
Indeed.
But I enjoyed this immensely. Yeah, thank you.
Until then, JJ, do you have a website you want folks to go to? Do you have a
yeah, you can go to jjarsenault.com. There's nothing there, but because I'm a web developer, I'll have a little placeholder up with an email thing in the next couple hours.
Excellent.
And and then I do have a Twitter handle that is at jjarsenault as well. And again, there's nothing happening there. It's like we're just cultivating right now, but hopefully in the future when there is something there, I'll reach out and you guys can give me a plug if it suits the moment.
Absolutely.
No, there's no question. Yeah, and I mean, it's just like go there now for that Zen moment of like, it's the Zen garden in social media right now,
Yeah. Well, when we're done with this conversation, I have 2 Kickstarters I need to go and get on right now. So
feel free to tell us about them. We'd love to check them out.
Yeah, no, yours.
I think I know what
I'm going to tell Curtis all about that one that I checked.
So there's this guy, Patrick. You should really check it out. Such an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for stopping by.
Yeah, gentlemen, thanks for having me on. I really enjoyed this, and I hope to repeat it again soon. And it's really good to talk about these things. And I'm just shocked that it's really quite natural, the intersection between comics and martial arts. And it's like, oh, I didn't even think about how easy these things fit together. Wow. So thanks, guys, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Take care.
Totally my pleasure.
I'll see you.
So,
ciao.
Hi, I'm Go, author, illustrator, comic creator, and the art director for Kung Fu magazine for more than 20 years. But I'm here to talk to you about a project that's really special to me. It's the middle grade graphic novel, A Tiger's Tale. Imagine the story of tigers and dragons and martial artists and monsters. So when I launched the campaign for A Tiger's Tale Volume 1, I did not know what to expect, but it succeeded thanks to a group of passionate backers. It was also awarded the Make More Comics art grant that year and was later featured as part of an art gallery exhibit. And that's why I'm coming to Kickstarter, to cover production fees, printing, copy editing, things like that. Books completed, with the exception of a few pages I've set aside for color over the course of the campaign. This turned out to be a popular feature of Volume 1's campaign, so I thought I'd bring it back for Volume 2. I think it's going to be great fun for everyone. Hope you'll support the campaign. I'm very excited about it. Thanks for stopping by.
As a kid, I loved Kung Fu movies. So I went to Chinatown, trained with a wise teacher, and became a Kung Fu master. Sounds simple, right? Not really. My journey, like the study of Kung Fu, was as arduous as it was rewarding, filled with as many secrets as revelations and as much heartache as triumph. It's a defining moment in my life, and while I began studying Kung Fu to learn how to fight, what I discovered was a way to live. Martial arts never came easy to me. I was far from talented, and even farther from being the chosen one. It was only through years of tenacious perseverance that I was able to make steady progress. And so, I was surprised when my master told me that I should teach Kung Fu and share the art outside of Chinatown. I did just that and taught Kung Fu to my own students for 20 years. I always wanted to do more to share the art of Kung Fu with others, but was limited by only being able to teach those within my immediate area. What about the rest of the world? Then one day, I had one of the deepest insights about Kung Fu. I realized that the punches, kicks, throws, and myriad of martial maneuvers are merely the delivery system for the true essence of Kung Fu, the philosophy and way of life. Having worked for years as a professional artist and storyteller in film, animation, video games, and comic books, I realized that I could draw upon this unique skill set to share my passion for Kung Fu with the greater world. And so I created Shadow Ghost, the Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master. The first issue is created entirely by myself, from story and art to colors and lettering. Every panel is filled with unprecedented accuracy in its depiction of Kung Fu by a comic book creator who knows from first-hand experience what it means to be a Kung Fu master. Shadow Ghost is a martial arts coming-of-age story about a young man whose search for the truth about a legendary hero leads him to study Kung Fu, and through a twist of fate, becomes part of the legend himself. For the first time in comic book history, you can immerse yourself further in each issue with Kung Fu skills technology, powered by Tiger Crane Kung Fu. Scan the QR code at the back of the comic and follow an exclusive link to an online instructional video where I teach you Kung Fu techniques featured in this series. With Kung Fu skills technology, you can do more than just read about the Shadow Ghost saga. You can become a part of it. The first issue is completely finished and ready for print. All that's needed is for you to make a pledge of support so that we can fund the printing of the first issue. Together, we can share the wisdom of Kung Fu with the greater world. Shadow Ghost is the story of Kung Fu. It's about the people, the art, the culture, and the philosophy. It's my story and the story of those that I've learned from, taught, fought, and loved. Join me and become part of the vibrant legacy in a place and time where we might not be the chosen one, but where we can make a choice to be part of something bigger and greater than just ourselves. I'm Sifu Kurtis Fujita, and this is Shadow Ghost, the Kung Fu comic by a Kung Fu master.